When I looked out the kitchen window, there were 3 strangers standing in our backyard. Not in the driveway, not at the front door, in our backyard. One of them was unfolding a survey map across the hood of a Beaufort County truck. Another was taking measurements near the spot we'd marked for the pool. The third was hammering bright orange stakes into the ground. Part of our fence was already gone. The contractor's excavator was parked beside the patio. Our kids had spent weeks arguing over where to put the diving board, and 3 men we'd never seen before were marking off our backyard like it was a crime scene. I opened the back door and walked outside. "Can I help you?"
The man closest to me checked the address on his clipboard. "You own this property?" I nodded. He pointed toward the middle of our yard. "You can't build here." I laughed. Then I walked back inside, grabbed the HOA approval letter off the kitchen counter, and handed it to him. He looked at it for less than a second before giving it back. "Your HOA doesn't have the authority to approve construction inside a protected wetland buffer." The inspector took the letter, glanced at the signatures, and handed it back. He pointed toward the county truck. "You need to talk to Beaufort County Planning and Zoning." Then he walked away. Behind him, another orange stake went into the ground. The excavator backed onto its trailer. The contractor rolled up the measuring tape. Half our fence was stacked beside the patio. The white outline of the pool was still painted across the grass. The orange stakes stayed behind. My daughter stood at the sliding glass door holding the diving board brochure. "Can we still get the waterfall?" I took the brochure from her and set it face down. I need to make a call. The contractor was loading equipment when I walked back outside. He handed me a clipboard. At the bottom was a single line: "Work suspended pending site approval." "How long does this usually take?" He looked toward the county truck. "Depends who made the mistake." Then he climbed into his pickup. I watched the trailer pull away. An hour earlier, our backyard had sounded like a construction site. Now it was quiet. Too quiet. The only things left were the orange stakes and the section of fence leaning against the patio. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the HOA parking lot. The approval letter sat on the passenger seat. "Approved as submitted." I carried it inside. The property manager wasn't there. The architectural review committee wasn't there. There was only a receptionist behind a glass window. I slid the letter underneath. "The county shut down our pool construction this morning." She looked at the signatures. "Oh." I pointed at the names. President Trenter, 2 committee members. She checked her screen. "Mr. Trenter is on the golf course." My phone buzzed. The contractor. I sent it to voicemail. The receptionist slid our application packet across the counter. "The board only reviews appearance." I opened the site plan. The yellow outline of the pool sat exactly where the county had planted the stakes. I pushed the drawing back toward her. "If the board only reviews appearance, why did they approve where to build it?" She looked down at the packet. My phone buzzed again. A text message lit up the screen. "Need an answer before 3 p.m. Otherwise, we're pulling the equipment. Storage fees start tomorrow." I looked at the clock on the wall behind her. 2:17 p.m. Less than an hour. The receptionist pushed the packet a little closer. Everything was submitted correctly. I opened it. Every page carried the same blue approval stamp. Near the front, buried between fence requirements and construction hours, one sentence stood alone. "Owners are responsible for obtaining all required governmental permits." That was it. No county permit checklist, no environmental review, no wetlands map. Through the front window, I could see 2 neighbors standing near the mailbox cluster across the street. Both of them were looking toward our house. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from my wife. The kids were standing at the back door. Behind them, 7 orange stakes cut straight across the yard. The diving board brochure was still sitting on the kitchen counter. I looked down at the approval letter. 3 signatures. Then back at the photo.
7 stakes. What exactly had they approved?
The Beaufort County Planning and Zoning Office sat 20 minutes from our neighborhood. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the contractor had already texted twice. The second message was shorter than the first. Equipment removed. Call when you're cleared to restart. I left the phone face down on the passenger seat. The approval letter was still there. Approved as submitted. The words looked different now. Smaller. Inside, the waiting room was almost empty. A man in muddy work boots argued quietly over a dock permit. Another homeowner sat with a rolled-up survey map across his lap. Nobody looked happy to be there. I walked to the counter and slid the HOA packet forward. The county stopped my pool construction this morning. The woman behind the desk didn't reach for the letter. She asked for my address. I gave it to her. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Then they stopped. One moment. She disappeared through a door behind the counter. When she came back, she carried a large map tube. She unrolled it across the desk. A blue line cut through the back half of my property. It ran straight through the white rectangle where our pool was supposed to go. I laid the HOA site plan beside it. The two drawings matched perfectly, except for the blue line. What is that? She tapped the map. Wetland buffer. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. Those 2 words were enough. I pulled the approval letter closer. The HOA signed off on this. She glanced at the signatures, then back at the map. Did they tell you to get county approval? I thought about the application packet sitting in my lap. Pages about fence styles, pool lighting rules, approved landscaping. Everything except the one thing that mattered. No. She gave a small nod, like she'd heard that answer before. My phone buzzed. My wife. I declined the call. A second later, she sent a photo instead. The fence panels were gone. Our backyard opened directly onto the neighboring lot. The orange stakes cut across the grass like caution tape. The diving board brochure was still on the kitchen counter. My son had circled the waterfall option with a black marker. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket. Can I apply for the permit now? She shook her head. Not for that location. She pulled over another map. Satellite imagery. Our neighborhood sat between drainage channels and a narrow strip of marsh behind the homes. The blue line connected all of it. What are my options? She moved her finger closer to the house. You'd need to move the pool. How far? About 20 feet. 20 feet? The patio disappeared first, then the diving board, then the waterfall. Weeks of arguments at the dinner table erased by a line nobody had shown us. I looked back at the approval letter. 3 signatures. 3 people who lived less than a mile away. 3 people who had approved something that could never be built. The woman began rolling up the map. Then she stopped. Can I give you some advice? I nodded. Don't spend another dollar until you find out who told you this was approved. Outside, I called the HOA office. No answer. I called the property manager. Voicemail. I called President Trenter. Straight to voicemail. I sat in the truck, staring at the photo of the blue line on my phone. Then I opened the neighborhood Facebook group. At the top of the page was a post from President Trenter. A photo of him standing beside a golf cart, smiling. Captioned, "Beautiful day to get outside." I switched back to the county map. The blue line, the orange stakes, the approval letter. That's when I noticed something in the bottom corner of the map. Revision date. 3 years earlier. 2 years before the HOA approved our pool. The revision date stayed on my phone the whole drive home. 3 years earlier. 2 years before the approval letter.
I parked in the driveway and left the engine running. Through the side gate, I could see the orange stakes crossing the backyard. My wife opened the front door before I reached it. She looked at the folder in my hand, then at my face. How bad? I handed her my phone. The blue line cut straight through the shape of the pool. She zoomed in on the date in the corner. 3 years earlier. She turned toward the backyard. The fence panels were still stacked beside the patio. The kids had stopped talking about the waterfall. Now they were asking why everyone could see into our yard. By dinner, the kitchen table had disappeared under HOA paperwork. My wife took the diving board brochure from the counter and placed it face down beside the sink. The neighborhood map the HOA had given us showed walking trails, pond access, and the clubhouse. Every detail designed to sell the community. The blue line wasn't there. I opened the county map again. Same backyard. Different reality. On the county map, our yard sat inside a protected buffer. On the HOA map, it was just grass. I called the property manager. This time someone answered. I gave my address. A keyboard clicked in the background. Then her voice changed. Oh, the pool issue. The pool issue. Not the approval letter, not the county stop order, just the pool issue. I asked which environmental records the Architectural Review Committee had reviewed. Silence. We don't usually keep those in homeowner files. I looked back at the blue line on my phone. Then what map did they use? She said the committee reviewed the site plan we submitted. Nothing else. Did anyone compare it to county records? The keyboard stopped. You would need to ask the board. Can I speak to President Trenter? He's unavailable this evening. Through the kitchen window, I watched a neighbor slow down near the mailbox cluster. His headlights swept across the fence panels leaning against our patio. Then he drove away. Who had access to the county map? She said she would need to check association records. Please do. The next morning, the reply came from President Trenter. Not a phone call, an email. The Architectural Review Committee had followed standard procedure. Homeowners were responsible for obtaining outside permits. Then came the sentence that made my wife set down her coffee. The association cannot be expected to verify every government restriction on every individual lot. I printed the email and laid it over the approval letter. Richard Trenter's signature appeared on both. One approved our pool. The other denied responsibility. Before lunch, I drove back to the HOA office. This time, I asked for association records. The receptionist handed me a request form, the usual information. I wrote a single sentence. All records related to wetlands, environmental reviews, county maps, and architectural approvals for my lot. Her eyes stopped on the word wetlands. Then she looked up at me. I'll have to forward this to the board. Please do. My phone buzzed before I reached the parking lot. A new email from the HOA. Subject line, Architectural Approval Clarification. I opened it beside my truck. The message explained that HOA approval did not guarantee construction feasibility. The review process only covered neighborhood standards. The board regretted any confusion. At the bottom, beneath President Trenter's name, was a sentence I had never seen before. All approvals are conditional upon governmental and environmental compliance. I pulled the original letter from my folder. The new email looked almost identical, except for that sentence. It wasn't on the copy hanging on our refrigerator. It wasn't on the copy I handed the county inspector. It wasn't on the copy that started the excavation. I took a screenshot of the new email. Then I photographed the original approval letter. 2 versions. One warning. Added after Beaufort County stopped the project. 3 days passed before the HOA responded. No records. Just an automated email confirming my request had been received. Outside, our backyard was becoming part of the neighborhood. People slowed down when they walked past the house. Kids on bikes glanced through the missing fence without stopping. Every evening, my wife moved the patio chairs closer to the sliding door. The excavator tracks were still pressed into the mud. The orange stakes hadn't moved. Saturday morning, I drove to the clubhouse. Golf carts filled the parking lot. Residents carried coffee cups toward the meeting room. President Trenter stood near the entrance greeting homeowners. Relaxed. Smiling. When he noticed me, his expression changed for a fraction of a second. I held up the approval letter. His eyes dropped to the paper. Then a neighbor called his name. Trenter turned, smiled, and stepped into another conversation. He never looked back. Inside, the meeting moved through routine business. Mailbox repairs, landscaping contracts, new umbrellas for the clubhouse patio. The board spent more time discussing fabric samples than the county had spent shutting down my project.
Near the end of the meeting, a woman in the second row raised a printed report. President Trenter leaned back in his chair while she spoke. The treasurer adjusted his glasses. The property manager stopped typing. The room quieted, just enough to notice. Trenter folded his hands on the table. We focused our resources on projects homeowners can immediately enjoy. A few people nodded. Someone scribbled a note. The meeting moved on. Outside, I sat in my truck, facing the clubhouse. The new patio sat directly in front of me. Fresh stonework, string lights, new furniture. Residents laughed around tables that hadn't been there the year before. I opened the neighborhood newsletter on my phone. The renovation announcement filled half the page. $78,000. I switched to the reserve study. A single word sat beside environmental compliance. Deferred. I looked back through the windshield. The lights above the patio flickered on as the sun disappeared behind the clubhouse. Monday morning, the property manager called. Some of the records I requested were ready. The folder waiting at the front desk felt too light. I carried it to my truck and opened it on the passenger seat. Most of it looked routine. Budget summaries, vendor approvals, meeting notes. Then a strip of yellow caught my eye. Someone had highlighted a sentence by hand. I checked the date at the top of the page. 19 months earlier. The highlighted sentence sat alone in the middle of the page. Board discussed potential future costs associated with county environmental buffer requirements. I looked at the date again. Then I opened the county map on my phone. 3 years earlier. I set the phone beside the meeting minutes. My pool application had come later. Much later. I searched the rest of the folder. Nothing about wetlands. Nothing about county maps. Nothing about buffers. Through the windshield, the new patio lights glowed across the parking lot. Residents were already gathering for the weekend social hour. I placed the highlighted meeting minutes beside the reserve study. Then I opened the neighborhood newsletter one more time. The renovation budget. The deferred compliance funding. The date on the county map. Outside, the patio lights switched on automatically. Right on schedule.
Help us grow. Join to Suburban Verdict.
The patio lights were still on when I drove home. I could see them from the end of our street. Warm, inviting, perfect. Behind my house, the orange stakes were still standing in the mud. The excavator tracks hadn't faded. The county stop order sat folded on the kitchen counter. My wife had stopped asking when construction would restart. Now she asked a different question. What happens if they never fix it? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. That night, I logged back into the homeowner portal. The reserve study sat exactly where it had the night before. 218 pages. I downloaded the full report, not the summary, the whole thing. Most of it covered routine maintenance, nothing connected to our backyard. Then I found the section again. Environmental and stormwater compliance. Deferred. This time I kept reading. The consultant recommended a full review of community wetlands, drainage easements, and protected buffers. Estimated cost? $142,000. I read the number twice. Then I opened the newsletter announcing the clubhouse renovation. $78,000. The patio, the lights, the furniture. I opened the annual budget report. Another $36,000 had been allocated to landscaping upgrades around the clubhouse entrance. I grabbed a calculator. Then I stopped. I didn't need one. I looked through the kitchen window. The fence panels still leaned against the patio. Our backyard looked smaller without them, more temporary, more exposed. My son stood near the sliding door with a soccer ball under his arm. A month earlier, he would have been playing in the yard. Now he kicked the ball against the side of the house instead. Every few minutes, it bounced off the wall and rolled back toward the orange stakes. The next morning, I drove past the clubhouse before work. A maintenance crew was planting fresh flowers around the entrance. 2 residents sat beneath the string lights, drinking coffee. One of them waved. I waved back. Neither of them knew why my backyard was still torn apart. Maybe they wouldn't have cared. Maybe they would have. I kept driving. At lunch, I called Beaufort County. Not zoning. Stormwater. The woman who answered recognized my address immediately. She put me on hold for less than a minute. When she came back, her tone had changed. Your subdivision? A pause. We've had ongoing discussions with the association for a while. I sat up straighter. What kind of discussions? I can't share details over the phone. Of course she couldn't. But this isn't the first inquiry we've received. My pen stopped moving. Other homeowners? Another pause. I didn't say that. She gave me the email address for a public records request. And she wished me luck. That was it. I stayed in the parking lot for another 10 minutes. Ongoing discussions. For a while. Not a misunderstanding. Not an isolated mistake. When I got home, I opened the county map again. The blue line crossed our backyard. Then the lot behind us. Then the lot beside us. I zoomed out. The buffer stretched through half the neighborhood. The clubhouse sat just outside it. I zoomed out again. The line cut across fences, patios, sheds, future projects. The kind of projects homeowners spent years saving for. I submitted the public records request before dinner. Then I walked outside. The evening air smelled like fresh mulch from the clubhouse entrance. I could hear music drifting across the neighborhood. People were gathering for the social hour. Someone laughed, someone else pulled up in a golf cart. Our backyard stayed dark. The orange stakes cast long shadows across the grass. My wife stepped outside and stood beside me. Neither of us said anything. She looked toward the clubhouse, then back at the fence panels. The next morning, I spread the documents across the kitchen table. $142,000. Deferred. $78,000 for the clubhouse patio. $36,000 for landscaping around the entrance. The numbers sat side by side beneath the county map. Outside, laughter drifted across the neighborhood from the clubhouse patio. The lights switched on automatically as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I looked back at the blue line crossing the screen. It ran through our backyard, then the lot behind us, then the lot beside us. The buffer didn't stop at our fence line. 4 days after I submitted the public records request, the neighborhood looked exactly the way Trenter wanted it to look. The mailbox kiosk filled up with new flyers faster than my inbox filled with answers. Every few days, another announcement appeared. Another social hour, another concert night, another reminder to bring guests to the clubhouse. Every flyer carried President Trenter's name at the bottom. The orange stakes, cutting across the back half of our lot, never made the board. One afternoon, I found my wife standing at the kitchen window. She wasn't looking at the house.
She wasn't looking at the fence panels stacked beside the patio.
She was staring beyond the stakes, toward the tree line and the stretch of property we'd paid extra for because it felt private. That extra space had sold us on the house. The pool was supposed to go there. So were the summer barbecues, so were the weekends we'd promised the kids. How much of it do you think we actually own now? I followed her gaze. The stakes disappeared into the grass and kept going toward the wetlands. For the first time since this started, I didn't have an answer. That evening, I walked to the mailbox kiosk. A small crowd had gathered around the new announcements. Neighbors compared plans for the next social hour, while someone asked whether guests could bring golf carts to the summer concert series.
Nobody looked toward the orange stakes. Nobody asked why county workers had been marking properties. Nobody seemed to notice the line cutting through the edge of our lot. The bulletin board was covered with smiling families and clubhouse updates. At the center was a flyer for the next social hour, hosted by President Richard Trenter. A neighbor I'd seen dozens of times stepped beside me. He tapped the flyer with the back of his hand. "Trenter keeps everyone in the loop." I pointed toward the orange stakes. "You hear anything about what's going on back there?" He squinted toward our property. "Drainage issue?" I shrugged. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." He shook his head. "If the board knew something, Trenter would have sent an email."
That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Not because I believed it, because he did. On the walk back, I passed 3 houses with American flags hanging beside their front doors. A couple unloaded folding chairs from the back of a golf cart. Someone tested the speakers outside the clubhouse. The music carried across the neighborhood long before sunset. Trenter's name was everywhere. On the welcome sign, at the bottom of every flyer, inside every reminder email. People trusted him because they saw him all the time. Nobody trusted the county. Nobody trusted developers, but everyone trusted the HOA president. The next morning, the county records finally arrived. I opened the email in my truck. No explanation, just a download link. Back home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table while my wife set down 2 cups of coffee beside me. Most of the pages meant nothing until I found a county memo with 1 sentence underlined. County recommends notifying affected homeowners regarding environmental buffer restrictions and future development impacts. I checked the date. 11 months before President Trenter signed our approval letter. I checked it again. Then I handed the page to my wife. Neither of us said anything. I logged into the homeowner portal and opened every newsletter from the last 3 years. Each one focused on keeping the neighborhood attractive and active. Pool schedules, landscaping updates, holiday events, reminders about trash bins. Not one warning, not one county update, not one mention of wetlands. I searched my email inbox. Nothing. Outside, golf carts rolled toward the clubhouse while families carried folding chairs across the parking lot. Every headlight passing our driveway felt like another reminder of where the money had gone. I picked up the county memo again. The notice wasn't optional. The county had recommended it. Someone had made a decision. The question wasn't whether Trenter knew. The question was why he thought homeowners didn't need to know. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood again. Near the mailbox kiosk, I ran into a homeowner who'd lived there longer than anyone else on our street. I pointed toward the stakes. "You hear anything about that?" He glanced over my shoulder. "Thought it was a drainage project. You ever get an email about environmental restrictions?" He shook his head immediately. "No reason to. Trenter would have told us." He said it with complete confidence. That was the problem. Everyone trusted the process because they trusted the people running it. Late that night, I opened the final county file. Most of it was routine follow-up. I almost closed it. Then one word caught my eye. Pending. I looked closer. The line above it referenced homeowner notification. The date beside it was almost 2 years old. I I checked the attendance records. President Trenter had been there, the property manager had been there, board members had been there. The notice was still pending. I carried the county records to the kitchen window. From that angle, I could see both ends of the neighborhood.
The clubhouse lights glowed above the trees. The orange stakes cut across the back half of our lot. One had become the face of the community. The other was where they buried the problem. Outside, someone pinned a new social hour flyer to the mailbox kiosk. The neighborhood had been notified, just not about the thing that mattered. The county records stayed open on our kitchen table for 2 days. Every time I walked past them, my eyes went back to the same line. Homeowner notification. Status, pending. Outside, the neighborhood moved on. New flyers appeared at the mailbox kiosk. Golf carts rolled toward the clubhouse every evening. The orange stakes behind our house hadn't moved an inch. On Saturday morning, my wife carried a cardboard box into the kitchen and set it beside the coffee maker. I'd almost forgotten about it. Our closing documents. Every receipt, every inspection report, every signature. Everything we'd signed the day we bought the house. She slid the box toward me. If they knew before we built the pool, maybe someone knew before we bought the house. I looked at the orange stakes through the kitchen window, then back at the box. For the first time since this started, I wasn't thinking about the HOA. I was thinking about closing day, the title company conference room, the stack of papers, the pens lined up neatly on the table, the way everyone kept saying the same thing. Standard procedure, routine paperwork, just sign here. I pulled out the closing binder. The pages still smelled faintly of cardboard and printer ink. Settlement statement, property survey, title insurance, inspection reports. Everything looked exactly the way I remembered it. Professional, complete, safe. My wife sat across from me while I flipped through the binder. Neither of us spoke. Outside, a golf cart rolled past the house. Music drifted from the clubhouse. The neighborhood looked exactly the way it had the day we bought the property. That's what made it hard to accept. Nothing about this place had changed. Only what we knew about it. Halfway through the binder, I found the property survey. The pool site sat near the back half of our lot. Beyond it, the tree line curved toward the wetlands. I checked the survey legend. Utility easements, drainage easements, building setbacks. Nothing about environmental buffers. I turned the page. The next section referenced an attachment. Environmental Disclosure Exhibit B. I flipped forward, then backward. Nothing. I checked the table of contents. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. The numbering skipped. I started over. Slower this time. My wife leaned closer. What is it? I pointed to the page. This references an exhibit that isn't here. She reached for the binder and checked for herself. The attachment wasn't hiding behind another page. It wasn't stuck together. It wasn't there. Outside, someone laughed near the clubhouse. I looked at the empty space in the binder again. Maybe it had never been included. Maybe it had been removed. Maybe it didn't matter. I wanted any explanation except the obvious one. I opened the digital copies we'd saved after closing. Same thing. The exhibit was listed. The exhibit wasn't there. I checked the title company's email. The downloadable files matched the binder exactly. Complete package. Every required disclosure attached. That was the subject line. I looked back at the survey. The tree line, the back half of our lot, the exact area where the county workers had planted the orange stakes. My wife folded her arms. Call the realtor. I looked at the clock. Saturday. No chance. I sent the email anyway. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't the realtor. It was our neighbor from across the street.
He'd seen the orange stakes from his driveway. Any updates? I looked at the binder spread across the table. We're still trying to figure it out.
He lowered his voice. I asked Trenter about it at the social hour last night. I sat up straighter.
What did he say?
The neighbor hesitated. He said it's a technical issue affecting one lot. One lot. I looked through the kitchen window. The stakes cut across the back half of our property. The same property we'd paid extra for because of the privacy. The same property we'd been told was ready for a pool. The same property everyone had walked through during the open house without mentioning a thing. What else did he say? The neighbor cleared his throat. He said there's no reason for the rest of the community to worry.
After we hung up, I looked at my wife. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to.
For days, I'd been convinced the neighborhood was about to discover the same problem. Now, I wasn't sure. Maybe this wasn't a community issue. Maybe we'd been living on borrowed certainty since the day we bought the house. That night, I searched every document again. The county map, the property survey, the approval letter, the closing binder. I kept coming back to the missing exhibit. Not because I knew what it said, because someone had expected it to be there. The page numbers proved it. A disclosure only matters if someone sees it. I carried the binder to the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, the clubhouse lights glowed above the trees. The orange stakes sat in the dark. For the first time, they didn't look like a construction problem. They looked like a boundary, a line between what we thought we owned and what we'd actually been told. I opened the binder one last time. Environmental disclosure, Exhibit B. Referenced. Numbered. Missing. The pool didn't create the wetland issue. It exposed it.
I called our realtor first thing Monday morning. She answered before the second ring. The moment I mentioned Exhibit B, the energy in her voice changed. Not fear, recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes a simple question doesn't have a simple answer. I'd have to check the closing file, she said. We already checked ours. The exhibit is referenced, but it isn't there. A pause stretched across the line. I'll make some calls. She hung up before I could ask anything else. An hour later, she emailed me the same digital package we'd downloaded on closing day. Nothing had changed. The missing page was still missing. I drove to the old sales office after lunch. The building sat near the entrance to the subdivision, just past the stone sign we'd photographed the day we moved in. The parking lot was empty. The developer's logo had been removed years ago, but its outline was still visible on the wall where the sign used to hang, a lighter rectangle against faded paint. Someone had covered the name. They hadn't covered the fact that it had once been there. A weathered banner still hung beside the entrance. Private home sites, natural views, connected living. I looked past the sign toward the tree line behind our lot. The orange stakes weren't visible from there. That was the point. Everything about the community had been designed to showcase what buyers could see, not what they couldn't. My phone rang. It was the title company. The woman from the closing department sounded careful. Too careful.
We reviewed your file. And? We distribute the documents were provided before closing. Who provides them? That can vary. Did anyone notice Exhibit B was missing? Silence. Long enough to answer the question without saying a word. We don't create disclosure packages. Another handoff. Another missing owner. When the call ended, I sat in my truck for a few minutes. Everyone had handled a piece of the transaction. Nobody wanted to own the whole story. I called the closing attorney next. He returned my call while I was driving home. Our office relies on the title package. Did you notice the exhibit wasn't there? We process hundreds of closings every year. That's not what I asked. He exhaled slowly.
The reference should have been reviewed. Should have. Another answer that wasn't an answer. Back at home, I spread the closing binder across the kitchen table again. My wife sat across from me. Neither of us touched the documents. We just stared at the empty divider marked Exhibit B. The page numbers before it made sense. The page numbers after it made sense. Only the space in the middle didn't. "Call the listing agent," she said. The listing agent called me back an hour later. She sounded confused more than defensive. The seller never mentioned wetlands. Did they receive Exhibit B when they bought the house? I don't know. What about the developer?
Another pause. The developer handled most of the environmental paperwork during the early phases. The early phases. Before the clubhouse. Before the golf cart parades. Before Richard Trentor became the face of the neighborhood. After we hung up, I logged into the community website. The homepage still showed families walking beside the lake at sunset. The marketing photos highlighted wide backyards, protected nature, and private views. I looked through the kitchen window toward our property. The orange stakes cut across the exact area we'd paid extra for. Protected nature. Private views. The words hadn't changed. Only their meaning had. That evening, I drove past the clubhouse. Families filled the patio beneath the string lights. Golf carts lined the curb.
Children chased each other across the lawn while music played through outdoor speakers. Near the mailbox kiosk, Trentor stood pinning a new flyer to the board. He smiled at everyone who walked past. People stopped to talk to him. Some thanked him for organizing the next social hour. Others asked about landscaping projects near the entrance. Nobody mentioned the wetlands. Nobody mentioned the orange stakes. I almost kept driving. Instead, I parked. Trentor looked up as I approached. "Everything okay?" he asked. I held up the closing binder. "Ever heard of Exhibit B?" He glanced at the binder, then back at me. For half a second, his smile disappeared. Then it came right back. "People don't move here for paperwork." I waited. He shrugged. "Most homeowners don't need every technical document." I looked toward the clubhouse patio, toward the lights, toward the golf carts, toward the improvements everyone could see. If we shared every environmental report, nobody would enjoy living here. He said it casually, like he was explaining why the pool closed early on Tuesdays. Not because he thought he was hiding something, because he thought he was helping. That was the moment everything changed. Until then, I'd assumed someone had made a mistake. Standing outside the clubhouse, I realized something worse. People had made decisions. They had decided which information mattered. They had decided what homeowners needed to know. And they had decided Exhibit B wasn't important enough to mention. On the drive home, I passed the subdivision entrance sign. Live connected to nature. I almost laughed. When I got back to the house, I submitted another public records request. This time, I wasn't looking for meeting notes or budget reports. I wanted one thing, the original Exhibit B, because somebody had removed a page, and everybody else had learned to live without it. The county replied the next morning, not with the document, with another form. Historical environmental records weren't included in standard requests. Older files had been archived under the original development phase, long before our house existed. Processing time could take up to 10 business days. I read the email twice. 10 business days? The orange stakes had already been in our yard for 3 weeks. I wasn't waiting another 10 days. That afternoon, I drove back to the old sales office. The building sat near the entrance to the subdivision, exactly where it had been the first time we visited the neighborhood. I walked around the building until I found a weathered emergency contact sticker beside the back entrance. The company name had changed. The phone number had been disconnected. Whoever sold the dream had moved on. Everyone else had stayed behind. On the drive home, I passed the clubhouse. Golf carts lined the curb. Families gathered beneath the string lights while children ran across the lawn. The place looked exactly the way it had in the brochures. Connected to nature, private views, resort-style living. I looked toward the tree line behind our house. The orange stakes were too far away to see from the clubhouse. That wasn't an accident. Everything valuable in this neighborhood had been designed to face one direction, away from the problem. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator cycling on and off. The glow from the screen reflected against the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, the orange stakes disappeared into the darkness. I pulled up the county GIS website. Parcel lines covered the screen. I zoomed in, then out, then back in. Every layer seemed to create more questions than answers. The clock on the stove read 12:47 a.m., then 1:18, then 1:43. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I kept searching. For weeks, I'd been reacting to information other people chose to give me. For the first time, I was looking for it myself. I almost closed the website. Then I noticed a tab I'd ignored all night. Historical exhibits. I clicked it. Dozens of archived files appeared. Years of maps and reports nobody in the neighborhood would ever think to search for. Near the bottom of the list, one entry stopped me cold. Environmental Exhibit B, Phase 3. I checked the date. 7 years before we bought the house. 3 years before the clubhouse patio renovation. Long before Richard Trenter became the face of the community. My hand hovered over the mouse. For a moment, I didn't open it. I already knew the answer was inside. I just didn't know how bad it would be. When the map loaded, I forgot to breathe. A blue line crossed the back half of our lot. The same line the county workers had marked with orange stakes. The same line missing from our closing binder. Our property wasn't near the environmental buffer. It was inside it. At the bottom of the page, a note referenced future development restrictions. I checked the date again. 7 years. The map had existed for 7 years. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. The clubhouse lights had switched off hours earlier. I printed the map and carried it to the kitchen window. The orange stakes disappeared into the darkness beyond the glass. For weeks, I'd treated them like a new problem. They weren't. They were evidence. My wife walked into the kitchen wearing one of my sweatshirts. She looked at the map, then at me. "Is that it?" I nodded. She didn't ask another question. Instead, she unlocked her phone and scrolled through old photos. A few seconds later, she turned the screen toward me. It was a picture from the day we toured the house. The kids were standing in the backyard, arguing about where the pool should go. My wife was smiling beside the patio. I remembered taking the photo because we'd already started imagining our future there. Summer weekends, birthday parties, barbecues, everything we'd planned fit inside that picture. In the background, through the kitchen window, I could see the closing binder sitting on the counter. I zoomed in. The divider tabs were visible. Exhibit A, Exhibit C. The space between them? Empty. The page had been missing before we made an offer, before the inspection, before closing day, before we signed anything. I sat down at the kitchen table. For weeks, I'd been asking the wrong question. Who knew about the wetlands? That wasn't the question anymore. The map answered that. The real question was simpler. Who decided we didn't need to see it? I logged back into the homeowner portal one last time. Buried in the meeting archives was a board summary from years earlier. One sentence caught my attention. Environmental review update discussed in executive session. No details, no attachments, no explanation. Only a list of attendees. Richard Trenter.
I printed that page too and placed it beside the map.
Outside, the first sprinkler system of the morning clicked on. Water sprayed across perfect lawns as the neighborhood slowly woke up. In a few hours, people would drive their golf carts to the clubhouse. They would wave to Trenter. They would pin new flyers to the mailbox kiosk. And none of them would know that the document changing everything had existed long before any of us moved in. I looked at the map one last time. The pool didn't create the wetland issue. It exposed it. The question now wasn't whether the truth had been hidden. It was how many people had helped keep it that way.
The attorney's office sat in a small strip mall outside Beaufort, wedged between a dentist and a tax preparer. Nothing about it looked important. After weeks of county maps, board summaries, and late-night searches through public records, that was exactly what I needed. No polished conference room, no promises, no slogans about fighting for homeowners. Just a quiet office, a stack of legal pads, and someone willing to read every page we'd brought with us. I placed the closing binder on his desk while my wife slid the county map beside it. The approval letter stayed on top of the folder, partially covering the board summary with Richard Trenter's name highlighted in yellow. 3 weeks earlier, those papers had felt unrelated. Now they looked like pieces of the same mistake. Daniel Mercer opened the binder first. He flipped through it slowly, stopping only when he reached the divider marked Exhibit B. His eyes moved from the empty space to the county map and back again. He asked whether anyone had shown us the environmental restrictions before closing. No one had. Had anyone explained that future development limitations applied to the rear portion of our lot? No. Had anyone mentioned that the board had already discussed environmental compliance costs years earlier? Again, no. He nodded once, as if he had expected every answer. For weeks, I'd imagined secret emails and deliberate decisions. I'd convinced myself that someone had hidden the truth. Mercer seemed to be looking at the problem differently. What makes you think anyone ever read it? The question caught me off guard. He wasn't defending the board. He wasn't defending the title company. He was questioning the assumption underneath everything, that someone, somewhere, had been paying attention. His finger rested on the empty divider. Most property problems don't begin with bad intentions. They begin with liability passing. The developer handed off the environmental risk to the title company pushed it to the closing attorney, and the attorney just cleared the file. Nobody checked because everyone assumed the person before them did. It's not a conspiracy, it's just the standard way things break. I looked down at the binder. The missing page no longer felt like evidence of a cover-up. It felt worse. It felt ordinary. Every step of the way, somebody assumed somebody else had already checked. Mercer placed the approval letter beside the county map. Your HOA approved a project without understanding the restrictions attached to the property. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, like he'd seen this before. I asked whether we should sue. He leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Not yet. Lawsuits are where simple questions go to disappear. He reached for a legal pad and wrote a single sentence. South Carolina law gives homeowners the right to inspect association records. Then he underlined it so hard the pen nearly tore through the page. For years, they've decided what homeowners needed to know, he said, sliding the pad across the desk. That law says they don't get to make that decision anymore. Don't accuse anyone of fraud. The moment people feel attacked, they stop listening. Right now, you don't need a courtroom. You need an answer. He pushed the legal pad toward me. Ask them when they first saw Exhibit B. If they read it, they'll have to explain why nobody was informed. If they didn't read it, they'll have to explain why they approved a project they didn't understand.
The next board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. The afternoon before, I drove to the UPS store and printed clean copies of every document. When I got home, my wife had cleared the kitchen table.
The folder sat alone in the center. Outside, the orange stakes cut across our backyard like they belonged there. This stopped being about permits a long time ago, she said. She was right. Every homeowner in our neighborhood paid monthly dues because they believed those payments bought something. Not landscaping, not social events, certainty. The idea that somebody understood the rules, managed the risks, and paid attention to the details ordinary homeowners would never think to question. The clubhouse parking lot was almost full when we arrived.
Golf carts lined the curb beneath the string lights, while small groups of neighbors stood near the entrance, speaking quietly. Taped beside the usual flyers was a handwritten note. "What's going on with the wetland stakes?" Inside, the room felt different. People checked county maps on their phones. Richard Trenter sat in his usual seat. Then he noticed the folder in my hands. His eyes stayed there a second too long. When homeowner comments opened, I stood up and held Exhibit B where everyone could see it. I asked a simple question. "When did you first read this?" Trenter looked at the page, then at me. He said he couldn't remember. I asked whether he had ever read it at all. He said the one thing nobody expected. I assumed someone else had reviewed it. The room simply changed, because everyone understood what that sentence really meant. The county assumed the board understood the restrictions. The board assumed the professionals had reviewed the documents. And all it took was one pool permit to prove none of those assumptions were true. I held up the county recommendation. South Carolina law gives homeowners the right to inspect association records. If nobody read the documents, how did anyone decide we didn't need to see them? No one answered. Neighbors who had lived across the street from each other for years started asking the same question in different ways. Nobody stayed long enough for the social hour. By the time we walked outside, someone had slipped a copy of Exhibit B beneath the glass of the mailbox kiosk. Not me, someone else. We drove home in silence. Inside, I left the folder on the kitchen counter. My phone vibrated. A message from the neighbor who had spoken up at the meeting. Just a picture. He'd opened his closing binder and taken a photo of the divider tabs. Exhibit A. Then empty space. Then Exhibit C. A second message arrived. A third. Different kitchens, different binders, same empty space. In this neighborhood, you didn't talk about money, you didn't talk about politics, and you certainly never showed anyone your closing documents. Those folders were supposed to stay in your safe, locked away for years. But nobody cared about the code anymore. They were looking for a way to save their equity. Tomorrow morning, another HOA payment would leave our account automatically, just like it did every month. I stood there, looking from the clubhouse lights back to the orange stakes. The pool wasn't finished. The county review wasn't over. But those were just details. The real damage was already done. We'd all spent years paying for the illusion that someone was guarding our interests, only to realize that the people we trusted were just as blind as we were. I left the folder on the kitchen counter, turned off the lights, and listened to the house go quiet. I wasn't waiting for the county to tell me what was wrong with our property anymore. I was just waiting to see who else would finally decide to look at their own.